right. Hello, thank you very much for kind of having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. I've only been in India for about a day, and I leave, unfortunately, later tonight. But it's a place that I've been very, very excited to come and visit for a long time. And I think it's an incredible time for us to get to know the community in India a little bit better. As the previous speaker just mentioned, there's an incredible amount of talent in India. And as the AI sector in particular starts to kind of rebalance and focus more on the AI application side and the agent side of things, I think that there's a really, really great opportunity for exciting, innovative, energetic development teams to come in and kick some butt developing really cool AI applications. And we might get a chance to talk a little bit about that. But, I never really like asking the crowd questions because it's, a potential chance for failure. But put up your hand if you've heard about Aethir before. Okay, good. All right. So it looks like at least some of you know who we are. But I'm excited to kind of share a little bit more about what we do. I think often the best way to understand what Aethir does is actually to take a look at the problem that we address first, right? And many of you have probably seen this particular issue referenced in the media, referenced in by tech founders. I mean, Elon Musk famously came out and said that GPUs were harder to buy than drugs. You have other big tech founders like Zuckerberg out there purchasing almost $11 billion worth of GPUs at a time. It's an incredibly valuable resource and one that's increasingly scarce. Now, when you look at the actual problem itself, however, we actually broke it down into 4 key pieces. These are kind of the 4 reasons that we think this scarcity is kind of exists and why it's probably going to be relatively persistent. The first, of course, is buy pressure, right? You have the biggest tech companies in the world with an almost insatiable appetite for compute. Now, why is that? It's because that the way that AI training scales, the way that AI capability scales is such that if you add more compute and more data to your efforts, you're more likely to achieve good results with your LLMs quicker. So effectively, if you throw more money at the problem, you have a higher likelihood of winning the race. And this is a race that's arguably the most important race that's kind of ever been run. So the big tech companies with the deep pockets essentially want as much compute as they can get their hands on. What does that do to the supply side? Well, it puts a lot of pressure on the supply side. The vast majority of the infrastructure that is desirable to these big tech companies comes from NVIDIA, and they can only produce so many chips per year. And as a result of that, the vast majority of those chips end up going to the companies that can pay the most, making it increasingly difficult for startups and smaller companies to access this resource. Now, when we take a look at the LLMs themselves, there's also another kind of interesting factor at play here, right? And that is that as you get more complex or more capable models, right? So ChatGPT 3 compared to ChatGPT 2 or ChatGPT 4 compared to ChatGPT 3, what we're seeing is that the later stage models are exponentially more expensive to train from a compute and a data perspective, right? So as later stage models are released, as more capable models are released, you're seeing this exponential trend in the compute requirements for those models. Yet within the same time frame, right, from ChatGPT 3 to ChatGPT 4, within that same time frame, we're not seeing an exponential increase in either the type of compute or the performance of that compute in the market. So essentially we're seeing this like pretty linear increase in supply and performance of compute and an exponential increase in the demand for compute to service these later stage frontier models. And that's a trend that is, again, very persistent, and it's a widening gap between what we see the market needing and what the market's actually able to provide. And then the final point is something that I think Aethir addresses quite well, and that is the inefficiency of GPU utilization across the market. We actually did a lot of research in this space, and we found that actually utilization of GPUs in enterprise formats is often as low as 15 to 18%. Over 80% of these resources are inefficiently managed. And if there was a way to kind of grab that resource and pull it into an infrastructure layer that you could then make that compute available to the broader compute market, this demand that's suffering as a result of kind of the first 3 points, that would be a really interesting opportunity. So that's what we built at Aethir, essentially a decentralized enterprise-grade GPU infrastructure. We serve AI companies and we also serve gaming companies, which I'll talk to in a little bit. Essentially, we aggregate compute from tech companies, from telcos, from crypto mining organizations, from other data centers, and we take that under-optimized resource and expose it to the Aethir cloud, making it available to builders all over the world. The experience is similar or should be familiar to anyone that's ever had to purchase compute. We don't want to reinvent the wheel here. It's very important that you try and limit the amount of education needed for customers when they're entering into your ecosystem. So as far as a customer is concerned, they can come onto our network, they can select a GPU, they can choose where that GPU is, how much they need, for how long they need it, right? And they can simply make that purchase on our network incredibly quickly. The only difference here is that you'll be using ATH, our token, to make that transaction as opposed to fiat. On the flip side, from a supply perspective, if you have a GPU, if you're an enterprise GPU owner, if you have something that kind of meets the enterprise capability or requirements of our network, you can actually connect your GPU to our infrastructure in about 15 minutes, right? So you can very, very quickly get your infrastructure up and earning ATH tokens on our network. And that's something that we focused a lot on streamlining over the last couple of months. So what makes Aethir different from other DePINs in the space? I think the main difference is how we chose to look at the compute that contributes to our network. I think the most common way to build a DePIN is obviously to aggregate consumer hardware, right? It's a great way to bootstrap your network. It's a great way to bring a large amount of hardware into your ecosystem. It's a great way to get really powerful and high conviction early members of your community. The challenge often with this type of infrastructure, however, is how do you package and sell it, right? If you're looking at the bigger kind of enterprise-focused buyers of compute, they have pretty strict standards with regards to performance and quality and uptime of the compute that they're purchasing within their network. And how can you go to them and convince them that this gaming PC, for example, that's contributing hardware to your ecosystem isn't just going to be switched off at night, right? Or if this PC in someone's living room isn't going to have its bandwidth throttled as a result of that family maybe watching Netflix, right? So what we found was actually the ceiling for revenue on consumer-grade compute networks was actually quite low. So we chose to focus exclusively on enterprise compute, a much more difficult approach initially as a result of kind of the demand and the scarcity of this resource. But it's one that allowed us to build a compute network that has essentially 100% compatibility or synergy with the demand from the biggest kind of compute buyers in the world, something that really hasn't been done before in the DePIN space. So what does our compute network do? We essentially have 4 primary compute products. We have the AI training side. That's where you take a model, say ChatGPT-3, and you train it to ChatGPT-4, right? That process of kind of improving the model is called training. It's very compute dependent, very heavy on high performance compute. So we have the largest collection of H100s and H200s within the Web3 ecosystem. On the right-hand side, you've got AI inferencing. That's another word for essentially the compute processing that happens on the application side. So once an AI has been trained and it's doing its job, that's called inferencing. And that's a that's a task that requires compute as well. So we have a massive amount of resources going into supporting that specific space at the moment. You may have seen a lot of interest that we're showing in the AI agent space, right? AI agents live within the AI inferencing compute workload, and they are something that I think is going to change the way we interact with certainly crypto, but pretty much the broader digital space. So definitely, if anyone here is interested in AI agents, we actually have a $100 million ecosystem fund that we're deploying to support developers building in the AI application side. We'd love to kind of have you guys connect with us and show us what you're building so that we can find a way to support you and pull you through all of the different development pathways we have within Aethir. I'll skip the gaming side because I've only got about a minute left, and I'll get to what I think is pretty cool. That's the Aethir Edge, right? So you'll see that device there that's sitting in the middle. That's actually a enterprise-grade compute node that we partner with Qualcomm. And essentially what it does is it allows us to put compute a lot closer to the user. I think a lot of you have probably heard of this term edge computing before. The ability to kind of do compute tasks on the edge between where compute usually exists and where users live, right? And that's a very traditionally expensive bit of real estate, right? It's very difficult to kind of optimize compute networks for stuff that happens on the edge, right? But the edge is a really valuable place to be. As you can imagine, there are a lot of latency-sensitive operations out there that would benefit greatly from being able to conduct their workloads as close to their user as possible so that they can create this seamless real-time interface between the user and their application. When you think about AI, for example, right now we interact with AI almost exclusively through a text box, right? We chat to AI with our keyboard. But very, very quickly, we're going to start to be interfacing with AI through maybe text-to-speech or speech-to-text, right? That's a processing layer that happens on top of the inferencing layer that requires a very low latency experience with the user and where that compute's happening, right? Then I'm pretty sure you can also imagine that we're going to be chatting with AI through visual interfaces, right? We saw Huddle earlier with their fantastic RTC platform, right? Soon in those chat rooms, you will have AI avatars, right? And those AI avatars need to have dynamic facial expressions. They need to be able to represent themselves in ways that seem human. All of a sudden, then you've got a real-time rendering layer sitting on top of your text-to-speech, speech-to-text layer, sitting on top of your inferencing layer. These are all incredibly latency-sensitive endeavors that would massively benefit from living on the edge, or at least being able to access compute on the edge. And that's exactly what we've built this edge network for. We've sold around 50,000 of these units. They're distributed all over the world. Anyone can actually purchase one. And as soon as you kind of plug it in and connect it to your network, it operates as a fully passive enterprise-capable node within Aethir's network. You don't need to do anything. And essentially, you then become an available resource within the Aethir cloud for anyone that's building really cool latency-sensitive or edge computing adaptive applications to kind of access your node. But thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.